my history with Iron Mountain is that I was in a company, and sort of one of the principles of the company called Connected Corporation, which did one of the very early online PC backup services. We did it both as a service and as licensed software for companies to run it. Although our original business model had been to sell to individuals and small businesses, there just wasn't traction for that. We didn't have the funds that it would take to reach them, and it was early, and we switched to selling to companies. And at some point, we caught the eye of Iron Mountain, and they acquired Connected Corporation. This was in 2004. And then I worked in one capacity or another for Iron Mountain until I retired at the end of 2012. And at the time that I joined Iron Mountain, they had been acquiring lots of companies. So like when you met someone, you say, oh, when were you acquired? As opposed to when were you hired? Okay, I'll bring up my screen share. And okay. Oh, at some point I'm going to show a little video, and I have to remember to turn on computer audio, but I think it sort of helps if I don't do it until then. Right? Come on. Okay. So here's the start of Iron Mountain. It started with mushrooms. So a man called Herman Naust was known as the Mushroom King. And here's a can of his product. And he lived in New York State, somewhat north of New York City, and he and actually his brother began growing mushrooms inside the huge wooden ice houses that had dotted the banks of the Hudson River. It was before modern day refrigeration, obviously, but by the time that they got going, these were abandoned. He was always good at finding a great deal. And after a while, the ice houses began decaying, maybe thanks to the mushrooms that he was growing there. And he moved to abandoned cement mines. I guess it wasn't actually, they weren't mining cement, they were probably mining limestone, but an ingredient for cement. Okay, then in let's see, I got to move my pictures so I can see the rest. So in 1936, he acquired an iron mine for $9,000, and that got him the mine and the hill above it. This mine it's not clear when it started operating, but its peak production was in 1875. And actually during the Civil War, the iron from the mine was used to make cannonballs and cannons and horseshoes for the Union Army. So finally, when the reason it closed in 1898 was that Andrew Carnegie had opened some huge iron mines on Lake Superior, and this could no longer compete with them. Okay, so he got it for a song, and he had this idea. He was starting to get a lot of competition. The mushroom business was sort of falling off. I guess there were cheap cans of mushrooms. He was selling canned mushrooms or cheap cans of mushrooms coming from abroad. And he realized that there was a demand for safe record storage from a nuclear blast. So he started this new company that he called Iron Mountain Atomic Storage. He had quite a flair for publicity, and I'll show you a little bit more about it, emphasize sort of security theater. But the way I look at this thing is his value proposition was, you might be vaporized in a nuclear war, but your records would still be safe.
Who cares?
Okay, so this was you saw that little opening of the mine. This was sort of built in front of it, and they did a fully enclosed concrete and steel building. The mine opened in 1951. But I have this great quote that first, he hired a dozen ex-cops, armed them with Colt 45s, and stationed them as guards. Now, did he need all that? No, but it was great theater. And he put in an underground generator, and he said, if we get into an atomic war, we might need that power.
A 30-ton door equipped with a time lock will guard one of the main passages in which 400 vaults are located during the initial phase of the enterprise. Already foreign banks have applied for storage space behind the massive door. Museums also are expected to seek protection for their priceless art treasures. In the atmosphere of international tension, bank files and records begin to find their way into the sanctuary.
Okay. And by the way, that 30-ton door or whatever was one that he bought it for $1 from an Ohio bank that had failed, and probably it was going to be expensive for them to remove it. So he did spend $20,000 having it moved to the iron mine, but still that was sort of a good deal. And it was very good theatrics.
How large was the storage area?
Oh, I don't have the size of it handy. It was fairly large. It was a big mine. It'd been worked for many, many years. And it's still in use by Iron Mountain. There's still things stored there. So let me go now and do a new screen share. Go back to my. Okay. Okay, and here is Iron Mountain's first customer, the East River Savings Bank from New York City. The bank has since been acquired, and probably whoever acquired them has been acquired as these things go. But essentially, the East River Savings Bank records are still stored by Iron Mountain. And this wasn't just records. So I got this quote, and I hadn't heard about this before, but I was searching for things, and I found this, that some top executives from various companies commissioned living quarters and were prepared to live underground for as long as 3 months. Hopefully the fallout would settle by then and they could come out and go again. So I didn't find any good picture of that underground other than the big gate at the big door and the gate behind it. But then a second mine was opened in Rosendale, New York, because there's another abandoned mine that now is bought for atomic storage, and that's also still in operation. And this shows you this a little picture of the inside of the mine. So this, you're not. I wanted to get across the idea that you weren't like crawling through tiny passages in these things. They were big. Okay, but then in the late 70s, the company went bankrupt. And I really don't know, I've never found out the circumstances of that. And if you look at any Iron Mountain official history, they don't talk about it at all. But, it had been headquartered, Now's company had been headquartered in New York State, but a Boston-based family-owned venture capital firm, Schooner Capital, bought it. A man named Vincent J. Ryan was the principal of that company. And they changed the name to Iron Mountain Records Management, which I think sounded a little better at this point. So that was okay. So that was in the late 70s, and in 1980, a man named Richard Reese became the CEO, and he served until 2008, and then he did another short stint, 2011 to 2012. So you know, I was there at that time, and I knew him a little bit. Very nice guy. So starting in 1980, the company just embarked on a huge acquisition tear. They bought Bell and Howell Records Management in 1988. That had a whole bunch of sites. I believe it's the same Bell and Howell, if you remember the old, movie equipment and the like. Then they bought something called Data Security International, a software escrow company, in 1997. These are just some highlights. British Data Management Limited, which was their first move abroad in 1998. Pierce Leahy Corp in 2000. Recall Holdings, which is an Australian company, but it was big in Europe and actually was gaining some significance in the US. They bought in 2016. But these are sort of the big acquisitions, but they bought up, there were many, many local record storage companies. You know, in many a city, someone had a warehouse that was repurposed for record storage. So there were a lot of these sort of mom and pop record storage companies, and Iron Mountain bought them up. Now, Pierce Leahy was their biggest competitor, and they were also going around buying up these companies. So there was sort of an arms race between Iron Mountain and Pierce Leahy. But then finally, Iron Mountain managed to buy Pierce Leahy. And interestingly enough, Pierce Leahy had better software for managing their stuff, and Iron Mountain switched over to using the Pierce Leahy software for tracking everything. Okay. So in 1998, they bought something called National Underground Storage. And I don't really know much about the history of that company, other than it had developed, there was a former United States steel limestone mine in Western Pennsylvania that also was had no longer been in use. And they developed it into a storage facility, primarily housing US government records. And this thing is so big, it has 130 acres underground, including a lake. And among other things stored there are the US government personnel archives. I also believe, although it's never sort of verified, that that the FBI stores its investigation records there, at least that's one of the places where it stores them.
I would have assumed that as they first went to microfilm and then microfiche and then computer files, that the acreage requirement would drop off considerably.
Well, I'll show you that there's a lot of stuff they store that takes up room, but do not downplay paper record storage. There's still a tremendous amount of it, and it stays for a long time. So I'm trying to remember, when I started Iron Mountain, there was, I heard a talk that Richard Reese gave about sort of the staying power of the paper boxes of records. So I've now forgotten the name of it. There was a broker that had gone bust about 15 years earlier. So this would have been, maybe it was like around 1989 or 1988. And unfortunately, I can't think of the name at the moment. And 15 years later, Iron Mountain was still storing their records, and they were going to be there until the very last court case involved in that bankruptcy was finally completely resolved.
Hey, Carl,
Yes.
are you going to talk about the environmental considerations of mines? Because like a limestone mine impresses me as a place that might be a little bit damp.
Yes. Yes. So this is an important thing. Thanks, Harry. That's a good lead in. So this particular location and then some other underground locations have the advantage that they're limestone mines, but that there is a cap of hard rock overhead that's impermeable to water. I suppose nothing is 100% impermeable, but it's pretty impermeable. So that keeps the mine dry. And the limestone is easy to dig out. So it's really the perfect combination. So when I say about 130 underground acres, some of that has not, I'm sure has not yet been developed, but they can, from time to time, they were digging out more areas to expand within the underground. So, but that's the key thing.
But a lake does not sound particularly dry.
No, it's not. It's a real lake. So somehow water does get in, but just in that area, and probably it got in mostly a long time ago. So they make use of that water for cooling, but they keep recirculating it. And, it tends to stay at a reasonably cool temperature. So they're actually very energy efficient.
But also with limestone, you're not going to have an average pH. You're going to have a very basic pH. And that I would think would be as much of a problem as an acidic pH.
I think that they did have to, add in chemicals to adjust it, but I never really found out the details of that. Let's see. Talking about energy there, I also want to mention, obviously it requires energy even just for paper and other record storage because, you have to keep the humidity low and you want to keep things reasonably cool, even in some parts of it quite cold. And Iron Mountain doesn't just store paper. They store film. They store film canisters. They store audio recordings. They store biological samples, medical samples, specimens. So some of that really requires very cold storage. Let's see. But then Iron Mountain, of course, Iron Mountain had, when I was there, Iron Mountain had its own data center located there. And in addition, there were some data centers that tenants of the mine operated. So Iron Mountain had these tenants who paid, they had various arrangements. So in some cases, Iron Mountain stored their boxes or records on a sort of piecemeal kind of basis. In other cases, Iron Mountain rented out a whole facility and the tenants, had their own staffing there. And I'm sure that was the case for like some of the federal government stuff where, it was considered, very high security and they weren't going to let anybody else touch it. It had to be their own staff. Let's see. Okay, I'm now going to show, I'm going to stop sharing this for a moment so I can start sharing a video. I've got actually two, but I'm going to just do one of these. And, communicating with the rest of the world. Yeah, so interestingly, so there were, at the time that I started there, basically they had AT&T and Verizon had had fiber into the mine. And they paid a fortune for it. And one of my contributions to Iron Mountain was bringing in some more competition from at least one other major carrier, which was level 3. And I found that level 3 had something running to a place that was about 20 miles away, and we got them to go the rest of the way. But Iron Mountain used to just be raked over the coals by both AT&T and Verizon. Verizon was really the backup, but they paid a ridiculous amount for that. Anyway, let me start this other video. Hold on while I get it. Bring it up on my screen first.
Want to collaborate with these? Enjoy presentations with Canva.
Okay, I'll get you past the ads.
As we drive down the road.
Okay, now, let me see, screen. Okay, now this one is actually a very recent video, and I was a little bit surprised because Iron Mountain was always fairly secretive about who and what was in the underground. And this video clearly was done with their cooperation, and actually shows quite a bit more than they would have shown at the time that I was working there.
Road in Boyers, Pennsylvania. We're met with the entrance to one of
does
humanity's
everyone-
most vital storage facilities that will protect priceless art and information for the next 5,000 years. This is Iron Mountain, also known as the Underground. Here, you'll find the original recordings of all your favorite music, famous photographs throughout history, original film from the biggest movie studios, and data from the federal government. Created to protect vital records during the Cold War, the mountain is capable of surviving both nuclear and terrorist attacks to ensure that our history lives on, even if we don't. So let's explore this treasure trove of human history and see what secrets it hides underground. Right now, we're 220 feet underground in a more than 1,000-acre mine, and we're ready to explore. But Iron Mountain isn't some museum you can just walk into. There are 8 security guards holding AR-15s guarding its entrance. But don't worry, we have permission to be here. The first stop is the facility's reception area, where clients and nosy civilians like us can grab some transportation for our tour. With high ceilings, winding tunnels, and unmarked doors, it's hard to know where you're going and what you'll find next. This is so everything remains confidential. The first door we see here is where the magic happens, the control room. Here, they monitor warnings for natural disasters or attacks, and they use these screens to keep an eye on the temperature and security of the entire complex. But here's our first real stop, a top-secret storage vault. That system on the right is the dehumidification unit, which helps keep everything inside the vault pristine. Let's head inside and see what this vault is hiding. Universal Music Group is one of the most valuable recording companies in the world, worth $33 billion. This vault contains the master recordings of world-famous musicians. This tape belongs to Frank Sinatra. Let's head next door and see how they digitize these sensitive recordings. Here's the studio where staff can digitize information or photographs and send them to clients without removing them from the safety of the mountain. But the most impressive room is right next door. This is Iron Mountain's digital studio, where sound and visual recordings are digitized, just like the tape we brought with us. To get one of these stored documents or recordings sent to you as a client, the minimum cost is $25 or $100 for a rush order. That's not bad. This next vault is another place where employees can pull recordings. It's one of the facility's many motion picture vaults. Just check out these shelves full of film. Each vault is dedicated to a specific studio. As we can see from this recording, this one belongs to Paramount Pictures. The cost to store these recordings is based on cubic feet and number of items. The mountain's largest vaults are 222,000 square feet with 100-foot-high ceilings. That's 22.2 million cubic feet at a cost of $1.75 per cubic foot and 53 cents per recording. This room costs $38.85 million for the space, and since there's about 120,000 films stored here, another $63,600 per year for the physical recordings. But it's not all about recordings. Let's head into this next vault where we can see over 25 million images stored in cardboard boxes. This is the Getty Photographic Collection, which includes raw photos of Marilyn Monroe and Rosa Parks. The stored collection in this vault is estimated to be worth almost $2 billion. This next room is also about images. It's Bill Gates' Corbis Image Collection of 100 million photos and 800,000 videos. The images include original glass negatives and even paparazzi photos of famous celebrities, all kept refrigerated at a temperature of 4 degrees Fahrenheit. There are so many drawers of historic images, we just gotta take a look inside one of them. Wonder what's hiding in this one. Now this is cool. It's the International News Photo Collection that originally belonged to William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper baron who was immortalized on film as Citizen Kane. By 1935, his collections of images were valued at more than $20 million. All right, let's keep moving and see what's next. If you're wondering how Iron Mountain avoids disaster, then check out this generator room. There's 26 of them in case there's ever a power failure. Oh, now it's this. Looks like it's one of the data storage centers. The data in these vaults is more numerous than the mountain's entire physical collection. Fortune 500 companies and federal agencies store information here. 9 terabytes of uncompressed data storage costs $12 per year, while retrieval costs 5 cents per gigabyte. What could be hidden in this vault? This must be the National Geographic Vault, which includes photos, written work, and original recordings. The vault actually consists of 2 rooms with sensitive film kept at 35 degrees Fahrenheit in here, and cardboard boxes full of documents in this room kept at 50 degrees Fahrenheit with 30% humidity. Let's take this door next and see what's under all these vaults. Looks like this is the temperature control room. These are the tanks that help cool the facility. They pump over 150 acres of underground lake water at a temperature of 50 degrees Fahrenheit through the mine, keeping the items inside at the perfect temperature. There are also 15 extra generators down here in case the backup needs a backup. That's it for our tour, but we should stop and say hi to Iron Mountain's Fire Brigade. That's right, the facility employs 3 of its own fire trucks to help protect all the irreplaceable information down here. Did you enjoy the tour? Iron Mountain Inc. is a very valuable company worth $5 billion with many facilities around the world.
Okay. By the way, for electricity, so actually there are all these backup generators, but at least when I was there, they were connected to 2 different, very separated electrical substations, and they got a very good rate on electricity because they took it in at a very high voltage and did their own transformation of it. So they were getting sort of primary power. On communications with the outside world, I want to mention one of the interesting challenges was that we installed some software that actually was run at 2 different underground data centers. That was one. They had another big underground data center in the Kansas City area that was not quite as deep as the 220. I think it was about 110 feet underground. And they, by the way, and above it was sort of a major nexus of communications. The Sprint, Sprint is located, headquarters was in Kansas City. But the timing between this software was sensitive to different servers had to have really the same time to a very close extent. And we needed to get primary time. Maybe some of you will know what that, what that means. It is the sort of the first time feed, then you get secondary time off that, etc. So we had to have something drilled down to be because there had to be an antenna above the ground, and that signal had to be brought into the mine, and we had that a need for that at both locations. So now, how could they be sure the storage area would not be affected by a direct nuclear blast? Who knows? It's great publicity to say it, There was a lot of rock overhead. I guess it depends on how big a nuclear blast. It probably would have survived at least some kinds of nuclear blasts.
Well, when I was in grammar school, they said that all we had to do was get underneath the desk.
Right, yes, the old duck and cover exercises, yes. By the way, I did see in the, I was never in the New York mines, but I was in the this National Underground a number of times, and I did see there was a cafeteria in there because there were a lot of people who worked in the mine, both Iron Mountain employees and employees of various companies that leased facilities in there. And there was also there was some rooms that had been set up for a disaster for people to stay there for a lengthy period of time. And by the way, the lake, they had some boats to go out on the lake. I got to peer in through some door to the lake, but it was pretty dark. I didn't see very much. Did Johnny Cash write a song about working in the mine? I don't know if it was about that. I don't think it was about that one.
Well, also there was 16 tons.
Yes.
Carl,
So,
I have a
yes,
question.
people could live there for a while.
Do they have underground storage in foreign countries? And if they did, how did they actually secure that in foreign nations?
Okay. To the best of my knowledge, they didn't have anything underground in foreign countries. And actually, an important thing to note is that the majority of Iron Mountain storage is above ground. They've got a huge storage facility in Northborough, Massachusetts. One. I visited another huge one in Ontario. These are still impressive facilities. I guess they wouldn't withstand a nuclear blast, but for most companies, that's good enough for their storage.
Carl, there was underground storage under the World Trade Center, next to the under that area. Was that an Iron Mountain facility?
I don't think so. Now, that may have been a Federal Reserve area.
Yeah, there was a Fed branch there, and I think they did have something underground.
Yes.
Well, the Fed branch is about a block or 2 blocks away on Nassau Street, and some of that is underground. You can take a public tour of that.
Yeah. By the way, sort of speaking of that, one of the things that Iron Mountain used to boast a long time ago is that that huge bank vault that you saw in the original mine. They said that was stronger than the vault opening for Fort Knox. Let's see. So I mentioned electricity. So they had electricity from 2 separate sources. They got very good rates. Communications, we eventually had a few different carriers in there. And there was one, what I thought was a pissant little carrier that I sort of ignored when I was there involved in the networks. And it later started, it was one of these things that started buying up everything else and is now a major carrier. And I assume that it's providing a lot of their communications. So yes, they have something like 1,500 storage facilities around the world. So there's really only a handful that are underground. Most of them are above ground. And in any of these, I definitely had some experience of going into a room where, the racks went off into the distance where it looked like that final scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark. But, they have, Iron Mountain actually was apparently the first company to start barcoding its boxes. And so, well, now Amazon probably does even a better job than them, but they had, they people who walked around there had these handheld scanners. They would scan in a box, and then there was software that when things had to be retrieved would not only direct them to the right place, but also if there were a bunch of things being retrieved around the same time, it would figure out a good path to get them all. And I'm sure Amazon does that, and probably by now better than Iron Mountain did. But Iron Mountain had some fairly good software for that. So at some point, Iron Mountain started thinking that, well, even though our paper and other material storage business is still doing great, it's not growing as fast as it used to. We can see where it's going to level off, and and someday it's going to start declining. So they got interested in getting into digital storage, and they had developed a Securities and Exchange Commission compliant digital record system, which it's a SEC compliance. This is for stockbrokers had to prove that they weren't finagling stuff, and so there were a lot of rules about how that storage had to be, how the digital storage had to be kept, and in such a way that it's was provable that it hadn't changed. So they did their own software development, and I have to say that I eventually became one of my responsibilities was sort of running that system, and it was lousy software, but anyway, it was also something where they had there was no way that they could actually make a profit on it because of the way that they had designed it in the most expensive way to do anything. So that in 2004, it acquired Connected Corporation. That's when I became part of Iron Mountain. And it combined that with this digital record system to form what they call the Iron Mountain Digital Division. And later it acquired a small server backup company. It was called LiveVault, an e-discovery company, and an email archiving company. E-discovery is where there's a lawsuit and the parties get to do discovery about each other. And so they can demand, I want to see all your emails that refer to such and such. and there are hapless lawyers who spend their time, looking through that stuff. And so this is a system that facilitates looking through that stuff. Okay. Now, in 2011, there was a company called Elliott Management. It's headed by Paul Singer. And I don't know if you've heard about him in this company. They're corporate raiders. So they buy into a company and then they force changes in it to increase the value of their investment. And they're generally not long-term investors. So Elliott Management bought 5% of Iron Mountain, and it came up with a plan for how Iron Mountain could make more money, and at least the largest single Iron Mountain shareholder, which is another company, decided that they liked that. And at that point, really, the Iron Mountain board directors had a cave. And so they divested the digital storage business, which was not making money at that point. And they replaced their CEO. That's when Richard Reese came back. And they started a process to become a REIT. A REIT is a real estate investment trust. And what's the advantage of a REIT? It's taxed at a lower rate than corporations. That is the sole advantage of a REIT. But gaining a tax advantage can be a very big thing. Now, in terms of divesting the digital storage business, that wasn't necessarily a bad idea, because I think it was starting to dawn on people that that Iron Mountain was not going to compete with Amazon and Microsoft and Google on storage, that just on digital storage, they did not have the scale to do that. So so they sold most of that off, and this was, like I said, I think they sold it to a British company called Autonomy that had some certain overlap with some of that, and then Autonomy was purchased 6 months later by Hewlett Packard for an incredible fortune. And then people in Iron Mountain looked at that and said, gee, they valued the business. They must have valued the business that Autonomy bought from Iron Mountain at 4 times what Autonomy paid Iron Mountain for it. So people felt really bad about that. But it was a disaster for Hewlett Packard. It turned out that there were shenanigans about the accounting and the like, and there's still lawsuits going on about it. But Iron Mountain did go ahead, became a REIT in 2014. It had to satisfy the IRS, and there was a whole long period of proving that satisfaction. So Iron Mountain's argument was that really what we have is real estate, and we're leasing and we're leasing real estate. Okay, the current status of Iron Mountain, I have it for the fiscal year ending 2020. It had 4.1 billion in revenue, 24,000 employees. There were about 2,000 locations, of which I believe that about 1,500 are storage locations. And it has been in recent years, it was really starting just at the time that I left, of building and acquiring more data centers. So the original plan was that to use the mine and the perceived advantages of it for more building more underground data centers. And I looked at the whole thing and I said, I don't think this is actually that big an advantage. The problem is that there are places above ground that have much cheaper internet access. So yeah, you'll convince some people to come in here, and your power is at a pretty good rate, but your data communications are expensive. Nonetheless, they started up a whole new business effort to do that. And since then, they've been building and acquiring above ground data centers. So they have purchased a couple of companies that had a number of above ground data centers. So I don't know the details about how that business is doing now. So one of I think that's the end of my slideshow. So I'd say Iron Mountain, besides storing all the physical records, well, you saw for the audio visual material how the originals could stay in the vaults, and they would make copies to send out. And sometimes they for paper retrieval, well, sometimes people retrieve a box or boxes and they pay for the retrieval. Sometimes they decide they don't need them anymore and they pay Iron Mountain to shred all the materials, and Iron Mountain has to have this whole chain of custody thing to prove that everything was was shredded into the tiniest of confetti. In addition, some of the paper retrievals are done by digitization. So it doesn't necessarily pay to digitize all your old records, but when you retrieve something, then it often makes sense. Okay, that's a point where you're looking at something, you can use it, and it's got to be pulled anyway. So that's a point where it makes sense to pay Iron Mountain to digitize it and to give you back the the digital data and, keep the paper there as, maybe satisfying legal requirements. So any other questions? Because I think I used my 45 minutes and we started a few minutes
Back
late.
when I ran a data center, one of the problems was that if you had tapes, this was back in the days of old 9-track tapes, if you didn't run the tape through and move the physical tape around, you got feed through between adjacent layers. And I would think that with all this stuff, particularly the digital stuff, stored in Iron Mountain, that there'd be a lot of degradation.
Well, generally, oh yes. So I guess I don't know about the sort of, the film storage. They said they keep that cold, but I assume there is some degradation. And I want to say that I personally got to see some interesting things. I saw the canisters that contained the originals of The Wizard of Oz, the original masters. I also went into a room that had Steven Spielberg's collection of Holocaust survivor videos. They were all on videotape because that was the technology at the time that they did it. I don't know whether they've since transferred them to other media. They also had a place where they stored the some of the artifacts from the Flight 93 crash in Pennsylvania. So there certainly were a lot of very interesting things. So I didn't mention a piece of Iron Mountain's business was that companies would back up their servers onto tapes, and then Iron Mountain would come and pick up their tapes on some regular basis and return, the older tapes. So the tapes would be recycled. And of course, it was up to if those computer tapes weren't, Iron Mountain wasn't keeping those for ages and ages. They would go through some sort of father-grandfather cycle. So probably not more than weeks. And it would be up to the customer to retire the tapes that were getting old and replace them with new ones. But that was another big piece of Iron Mountain's business. And I assume that that's still going on. So all those facilities that were starting paper records also had rooms of tapes of all different technologies.
Well, thank you very, very much. So our next speaker is Stan Rose. Stan and Joel Schwimmer and I went to college together. So I've known him since 1963. Looks the same. And,
yeah, exactly.
Some years ago, after he retired and he moved from the Northeast, he went down to Charlotte, North Carolina. But we've stayed friendly over the years. And one of his more interesting experiences was responsibility for computer systems for a bank in the World Trade Center. And that's what I asked him to talk about today, because everybody knows what happened to the World Trade Center, but not too many people, I suspect, know the repercussions to what was inside that big building. So with that, Stan, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, John. I would just say I was across the street from the Trade Center, but you'll see there wasn't much difference. So let me start my screen here. There. Is that coming up?
Yep.
Okay. So John said a little bit about who I am. Let me get this to move. So who am I? Well, I grew up in the Boston area in Newton and went to MIT around the same time John did. I was electrical engineering, although it really was computer science, although it was the start of the computer science era, so we didn't have a CS degree. I started at Mass General as I don't know, some of you may have heard at the start, Carl and I worked together there, although he remembered and I didn't. And that's one of the things that I'll say is that my memory of what happened 20 years ago, let alone 50 years ago, are they could be better. So after Mass General, I went to work for a company that was actually taking some of the work we had done at MGH and marketing it. As a company called Automated Health Systems. It was located in Reading, and we lived in Reading at that time. And then around 74, it moved to the New York area. So we moved not to New York, but to Lawrenceville, which is Princeton, if you know the area. And I went to work a few years later for Bankers Trust Company, which I'll talk about. I was there for 22 years. And then I went to the Bank of New York, and I was there for 10 years until I retired in 09 and moved down here to Charlotte. Our daughter and son-in-law, and of course the grandchildren, live in Columbia, which is about an hour and a half away. And that's why we moved here. We thought, let's be close, but not in each other's backyard. So here's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm actually going to talk a little about, there was a bomb in the Trade Center in '93. I'll mention that. Then I'll go through 9/11 as it impacted the Bank of New York. Little of my personal experiences, how we recovered. And since I had been at Bankers Trust so long, I knew the people there, so I can mention a little bit about there. And as John reminded me, we should talk about, what do we learn and what came out of that. But again, I just want to say it was 20 years ago. A lot of these technologies aren't in use anymore. And since I left the company, I don't have all my detailed notes. I spoke to some of the other people I worked with, and their memory of some of the details are fading also. But anyways, I think I put together what you're looking for. So first, let me talk about the bomb that went off in '93. And at that time, I was, this is the Bank of New York, Bankers Trust is here, and here's where the bomb went off. My office was right about here on the 7th floor, and I was sitting in my office, and I heard this loud boom. It sounded like someone had dropped like a computer room air conditioner on the floor right above me. And if you know how big those things are. But when I looked out the window, I could see smoke was rising up from there. So we knew something was wrong. This is what it looked like. I was on Liberty Street. This is actually West Street. So this is facing west, and I was on the south side of the building. I don't have a picture of that. But the impact was it knocked off all the power for the building. And eventually we sent everyone home. The building itself our building wasn't damaged at all, but we did send everyone home. My office was next to our CIO. And so he asked if I would stay, which I did. And just to, I was checking up on how systems were doing, and systems were still running. But our systems were located on the 39th floor. The elevators were out. I was on the 7th floor. So I was calling back and forth. At one point, he wanted to send a message to the president and chairman of the bank. So we drafted something, and I sat down at my desk to type it in. And I'm like, oh, wait, I don't have any power. How can I do that? So I told that to Carmine, our CIO. And he said, well, can you go up to the data center? And I said, that's on 39. We're on 7. I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. So I ended up dictating it to the chairman's secretary, who was in another building, and that handled that. So that was the first disaster I was involved in. And as you see, I was just on the south side across the street from that. So let me get into the main part of the talk, which is what happened on 9/11, how I was involved, how it impacted me, and how it impacted the bank. Now, at that time, I was working for the Bank of New York, which I just show you here. Here's the Bank of New York is just on the north side of the trade center. So I had moved from down here on the south side to up here on the north side, but I was still adjacent to the trade center. Who was the Bank of New York? In 2001, it was ranked number 11 by assets. We had 87 billion. We had the fourth largest bank branch in New York City, in the whole New York area. And we were a very large processor of government securities. We processed about half of all the government securities, with JP Morgan Chase processing the other half. So here's the timeline of what happened, how I was involved that morning. So I came in, I take the path, which is a light rail that runs from Newark, New Jersey. The path comes in this way. It comes in underground under the Trade Center. I got in around 7:30, and I walked over to my office here. And my office here was on the 9th floor. And around 8:46, I felt another boom. It felt like that same as it felt in 93. But a minute later or so, I went to the window, south windows, and looked up, and I could see, uh-oh, this is not a bomb. First of all, it's pretty high. And if you look, you can see the edges of the point of impact. This is where the first plane hit, are bent in, not out. So that told me that this is not a bomb knocking things out. It's something that came in. At that time, we thought maybe it was a small plane or something. We didn't know. But I called my wife to tell her we were okay. Of course, at that point, I don't think she knew what I was talking about, but turned on the news and immediately knew. But a few minutes later, at 9 o'clock, the South Tower was hit. And at that point, everyone knew this is not just an accidental hit by a light plane. It took about a little less than an hour, and just before 10 o'clock, the South Tower collapsed. So meanwhile, in this time between 9 and about 10, I had staff located on the ground floor, and I was going back and forth between my office on 9 and making sure they were okay down on 1. But I was caught on 1 at around 10 when they told us to evacuate and head north. And so I didn't have time to go back to my office, get my briefcase, get anything I needed. We just started walking north, walked up Greenwich Street, which is the building in front of the office, and got up about as far as Greenwich, where I turned around and could see the North Tower collapsing. And, this pretty traumatic at this point. Here you can see, this is the Bank of New York building down here. So it was pretty close. If you see where the bank is located here, and here's the Trade Center, there's one building of the Trade Center here, number 7, and there's a Verizon, or it was New York Telephone, had an office right here. And the power of the collapse forced all this debris and damage in the power, and it knocked out all the windows in the front of our building. So it was a pretty big mess. Luckily, at that point, none of my staff was injured, so that was good. Although we did have some people who were killed in the evacuation, actually. So continued to walk uptown. We had, I don't know how our real estate department managed to do this, but they acquired space at 1290 Avenue of the Americas, which is right behind Rockefeller Center. It's actually the next block from Radio City Music Hall. I tried to call my wife to tell her I was okay, but none of the phone circuits. At that point, we had rudimentary cell phones. I don't think I had anything with me at that point. So I couldn't call her. I went into stores. They couldn't get circuits. So she didn't know how I was doing, although she did see the bank. This is the Bank of New York building, and you can see it has a unique tiered roof. So she was able to see, well, at least the bank building is still standing. This was sort of significant locations of my walk. So again, here's where Bankers Trust was. Here's the Trade Center. Here's the Bank of New York. This is Greenwich, goes up this way. So I got to about here where I turned around and saw the Trade Center collapse. So continued walking and ended up about here, which is 1290 Avenue in the Americas, which is also 6th Avenue. And this is, where's the mouse going? There it is. This is Rockefeller Center here. So I finally got to my offices around 1:15. Now, just to make things a little bit more interesting, I had tripped about a couple weeks before that, and unbeknownst to me, except I knew my foot hurt, I had dislocated a toe, and it was still dislocated. So walking uptown didn't help, exacerbated it a little bit. So once I reached our offices, the phones worked, but I still couldn't call New Jersey. You couldn't get a circuit because everyone was trying to call New Jersey. But my daughter and son-in-law lived in Iowa. So I got this idea, well, no, who's going to be calling Iowa? Everyone's calling New Jersey. So I called him and got through to him in Iowa, and he was able to call my wife and to let her know. So at least at that point, I could get through to her and get a message through to her. So how did things get started? Well, I spent the afternoon making sure I could find all my staff. Some had walked home, like walked back to Brooklyn, and some others had managed to catch boats out of New York into New Jersey. I found enough people that we could start to get organized. We had all this space that our real estate department had found. The Equitable had just moved out of a lot of space in this building. And I don't know how, like I said, I don't know how they found it, but we moved in there. I didn't go home for a couple of days. That 9/11 was a Tuesday. I crashed on a friend's couch a few blocks away on Tuesday and Wednesday night. I did finally get home Thursday night, which was the 13th. Then back in the office the next morning, home Saturday night. And at that point, I kept up the that 2-day cycle for the next week. The only day I stayed home was Yom Kippur, which is a week later. So what did we have to recover? Well, we had a lot of different technologies, some of which I can talk more about than others. And like I said, I did contact some of the other people involved to remember, but we pieced some of it together. But like I said, it's 20 years ago. So we had mainframe systems running IMS and DB2. Those are databases. We had a lot of systems that ran on VAXs running VMS. Those use databases RDB and TMX. TMX is a specialized transactional database. We had systems on Unix, Solaris, which was Sun Systems, and AIX, which are IBM systems. They ran DB2, and Sybase was our main database. So our IBM system, the main technology, was located in a data center in Teaneck, New Jersey. And we used SunGuard as a backup data center. Now, SunGuard, their business model overlapped a little with Iron Mountain. But what you did with SunGuard is they had a lot of systems set up, IBM systems, mainframes. And what you did is you got a contract that said when you needed it, you could get space, time on their machines. And I guess you had excuse me, you negotiated the contracts for the order because if a lot of systems like that day, a lot of companies needed to get there, they had to be a priority order. But somehow we were near the top. So we got machine time on those systems, which replaced our backup systems, which had been in Manhattan. We duplicated our data between sites. We used EMC. EMC is a company based in Boston area, so some of you may know that. It's now owned by Dell. We had large disk products, and we used one of their technologies called SRDF to duplicate our data between sites. And we recovered our IMS systems using an IBM product that's part of IMS called RRDF. I wasn't on the mainframe side, so I'm not an expert on those at all. And DB2 was recovered using the tools that have been part of DB2. A lot of my responsibilities were related to DEC systems, which at that point was owned by Compaq. I had been using DEC systems since Mass General. So yeah, at this point, it was quite a few years. So that's where a lot of my expertise was. Well, one of our DEC systems, which is one I'll talk about here, was part of our business called broker-dealer services, which processed government bonds. And the Bank of New York was one of two large processors. We processed about $1.5 trillion a day in government bonds. So to put that in perspective, in 2001, the GDP was 10 trillion. And the Fed, today, the Fed just processes about 2 trillion in securities and 4 trillion in government bonds. So you see the 1.5 trillion we did was a significant part of their business. And it was very important to the whole country that those got processed properly. So here's our primary systems were running here at 101 Barclay. Here's the Trade Center, and just for reference, here's Bankers Trust. And the backup data center was here, one wall. Our corporate headquarters were here, one wall. And this was the mainly operations up here. So the primary system was here, but one of the big mistakes we made is our backup system was here at Wall Street, which is only less than a mile away. So when we lost this system, because of what happened, we also lost access to one wall. I mean, it wasn't damaged, but we had no physical access because we had been ordered to evacuate. We transferred data manually between sites.
Excuse me, Stan, did you have power? Do you still have power down there?
We had our UPS. We did lose power, but we had uninterruptible power systems. And I noticed a question in Carl's talk. These were powered by diesel, so you had to make sure diesel was delivered, that you had enough of it, and of course that was going to be a problem long term. So our systems at Barclay continued to run, but we didn't have any people there anymore. We could get to them remotely for a while the communications were still running. We had the UPS systems that kept them up, and we were able to finish our processing that day with the Fed. But we knew we could not process with the Fed anymore after that. The government securities were down. Let's see, that was Tuesday. Wednesday, there was no processing. So we were able to get organized, to get up in time for Thursday morning. So what we did we had permission to get back to Barclay Street just long enough we had to recover the encryptors. We had backup encryptors, but we didn't have backup the keys to the encryptors. So we had to go to Barclay Street to recover the keys, and then we could bring those to Wall. We were able to get the staff back to Wall to continue to run the backup system. And we were able to get back online in time to process on Thursday morning. Compact, which now owned DEC, they scrambled and they were able to locate replacement backup systems because we knew we couldn't run without backup. So we got those and we put those into our TNEC data center. So what did we do long-term? Well, of course, we realized you can't have the backup systems so close. So we had a company do a study for us on some of the safest places to locate equipment. And they came up with a recommendation to build a data center in Nashville with the, and I guess it was based on, it was far enough inland that you didn't have to worry about hurricanes. It wasn't quite in Tornado Alley. There was inexpensive, relatively speaking, inexpensive staff. So, and it certainly wasn't in the same infrastructure as New York. So we ended up long-term with the primary data center in TNEC and 2 facilities in Nashville. One, which was a mirror of our TNEC facility, and a second, which was just a data vault. And while we ran synchronous links to the data center, we just could run asynchronous links to back up all our data to the second facility. We then were using VAX clusters to replicate data between facilities. And
was data speed a problem? Were you able to get T1 lines back then? Or what did you have?
We had T1 lines is what we had. So these weren't running simultaneously, but you had real-time backup, or real-time enough, because the data, this wasn't shared data running between them, but it meant that if something happened, we did have the backup right here almost immediately. And long-term, we had the second one. I mean, long-term meaning hours. One of the things we had to make sure is that we had no single point of failure, especially in the communication links. So you had you had dual communications, and you made sure that one entered the building from one side, one entered the building from the other side. And then you had to work with the communication companies, the telcos, who were by and large providing the communications, to make sure that they didn't run them over the simultaneous facilities. So you made sure that some might run through Atlanta, some would go through Chicago, or whatever their paths were. But you made sure that, as far as we knew, you didn't have any common single points of failure in communications. And we finally got back into our building in June. Our building at Barclay Street was a building with an atrium. You see the atrium here. This is the front of the building where all those windows were knocked out. So this atrium went all the way to the top of the building, the 40th floor. So the building had the offices between indoor windows and outdoor windows, and you got to look down on the facilities. So we got back up. We have this large flag posted the whole way, and this is Governor Pataki who was talking, and this was our chairman, our guy named Rennie, was there. So they had a big welcoming back ceremony. That was quite dramatic when we came back. I want to talk a little about Bankers Trust because I did know what they did because of my time there. at Bankers Trust, all the online systems, all the critical applications were built on DEX systems. At that time, they were VAX clusters. They had their primary systems running here at Bankers Trust Plaza. And here again is the trade center, was right here. And their backup data center was across the river. So it was within visual line of sight, but it was far enough away that it was separate power grids, separate telcos, and it was isolated. Based on the technology they were using, when it went down here, the data center just kept running. It was a transparent fallover. That was the advantage of VAX clusters. Now, what happened to the bank? Well, this is the front of the bank, Bankers Trust Plaza, 130 Liberty Street, that faced the World Trade Center. And what happened is when the South Tower came down, the TV antennas that were on the roof sliced through the front of the building, and that's what took out Bankers Trust Plaza. This was Bankers Trust was acquired by Deutsche Bank in 99, which happened to be when I left, and that wasn't. I wouldn't say that was coincidental or not. So this became a major eyesore and problem for the city, because now that it was open and you couldn't get back to it, a lot of mold formed, and it was a quite serious problem. It took about 2 years to take down that building. So what did we learn? Well, everyone's disaster recovery had been predicated on you lose your building, you have a fire in the building, something like that. But it was always seemed to be considered part of, it's a problem with this one building, not a wider area disruption. And that was the big thing that everyone realized at 9/11, because the whole Wall Street area basically was off limits. So everyone realized you had to ensure that you had unique power grids, that you had unique communication infrastructure, that you had availability of staff. See, that was our problem. You couldn't get people to either Wall Street or to Barclay Street. Well, the Bankers Trust, they could get people into New Jersey. People who lived in Brooklyn and it might have taken them a while to get there, but at least they could. The other thing was everyone had pretty good backup plans for their development systems, for their production systems, I mean. But what we needed was development as well. When you're putting systems back together, like you were on right after 9/11, you had to update systems, make changes on the fly. So you needed to have all your development code. So that was something everybody learned. And also we learned you have to continuously re-examine your communication paths, because we work hard with all these telephone companies, with MCI, AT&T, et cetera, to make sure we had unique paths. And then over time, they would update their infrastructure and would say, uh-oh, they're a single point of failure again. And also, we realized the advantage of an active model where two systems are running the same application simultaneously in locations, versus the conventional mode, which was I'll run production here and development there. There were big changes in regulations. The industry worked with the FFIEC, which is the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council. That's an interagency regulator consisting of the Fed, the FDIC, OCC, NCUA for credit unions, CFPB, the consumer financial regulators. And new regulations were put in place, working jointly, requiring things like out-of-state backup, et cetera. And one of the things everyone realized is there was too much concentration in financial services in the metropolitan area, and that's why people moved to other models. So with that, guess I'm doing okay on time. Let's see what kind of questions people have. And Steve is asking about what did I mean by unique power? What I meant is in New York, you get power coming in from one power station, one coming in from another power station. You can see at various blackouts how some buildings are lit and some aren't. We had a building on Wall Street. I think it was 14 Wall. And in the blackout that was there was one in the 90s. I forget the date. And we had our foreign exchange processing in this building. And it was interesting that one floor had power on the, I'll say on the east side and no power on the west side because it had power grid feeds from different power stations. And the same thing with communications. You want to make sure that you had one coming in one entry point, one coming from another, one on MCI, one on AT&T, one on Verizon, whoever the communication providers were for that location.
Stan, I have a question.
Yeah.
Why did it take you so long to evacuate the building? There was a whole hour there where that whole building should have been evacuated.
Well, I think the first thing was they weren't sure what would happen when the tower came down. Would it be more dangerous for us to be on the street or not?
Mm.
I would say in hindsight, we should have left earlier. But, we didn't. Some of the other very sad things was I commuted out of, at that time, West Windsor, New Jersey. Princeton Junction was the Amtrak stop. And you would see when you got back cars that were left in the parking lot for weeks because no one came back to get them. Mm. Or when they brought clothes into the laundry and apologized that these things were all, covered in powder. And they would say, you're not the only one. We have a lot of this stuff coming in. When I lived in Reading, say, I would hear about people who lived in the New York area and were commuting an hour and a half a day. And, I had a 4-minute commute from Route 28 to whatever the next exit up was by the office park. So I think, these people are crazy. And then I did it for 35 years. So, well, you'd see 8,000 other people on the train platform doing it. So it was something you got used to, but it was really something.
I wonder what what you have to say about the sort of emotional aspects of having been in that whole scene, and what your view of it is now with a little bit of distance. Well,
I think you can notice my recollection of my personal experience is better than my recollection of all the technology that was going on at the time, because it certainly was. It was something you never want to go through again, obviously. I had a boss at Bankers Trust who was speaking at the Windows of the World that morning, which was the top floor of the Trade Center. And of course, he was lost that day. I had a fellow very close friend I worked with for many years who was going to attend that same conference and just was feeling like he had a cold coming on that morning and decided not to go. So, it's like the movie Sliding Doors. What would happen if you did or you didn't? I don't know how to put myself in someone else's head of how they were, especially a young kid who sometimes, you know, feel like they're invincible. But anyone who was there, I can't imagine they can just completely slough it off.
Who had the responsibility for declaring the evacuation of the building?
I imagine it was just our real estate department or the head of operation. Oh yeah, that was the other thing. Our COO, our chief operating officer, whose office was in our building, and real estate and technology reported to him. So if he had been there, he would have had that responsibility. He happened to be at a conference in Phoenix. You know, terrible time to not be around. So I imagine that he was in contact with the head of real estate and security, who would have made that call.
No, this is not a nice thing to think about, but from the point of view of someone who's interested in nuclear weapons and their danger, this was actually kind of a minor event in New York City compared to what a small nuclear weapon would be. And you can see how incredibly difficult it was to recover just from this event. And I think about that.
Yeah, we just thankful that they only had planes and they didn't have planes with bombs in them.
I'm surprised at all the collateral damage that you showed. I didn't realize that for blocks around, things were taken out. Where did the antenna come from that damaged the Bankers Trust building? Was that from the World Trade Center building?
Yeah, the New York City television stations all had their towers, their antennas on top of the Trade Center buildings. In fact, that was another thing that became a problem, is that the TV stations lost their antennas. So they ended up, I'm not sure, at first I think they went to the Empire State Building, but there may have been a gap before they could get those running. But that was I don't have quickly a picture of I wonder if it's on that picture I had. Let me just go back. When I had the picture at the start, I'm looking back now at see if
I think there's a moral to large buildings.
Oh yeah.
The larger the building, the more things are in it, and the greater the dependency is on single locations.
Yeah.
And so having all the TV antennas there, and I don't know what the total population was of the building beyond the 3,000 that were killed, but it was enormous. And if you look at the population within a half a mile or a mile of the center, during work times, that must have been a couple of million.
Well, that was one of the things that I hate to use the word lucky, but the fact that it was early in the morning and not everyone had arrived. Although, you know, people come in pretty early in the financial services industry, but it still was before 9. And a lot of people come in on the path. So when the Trade Center was hit, the path stopped immediately. There were trains that were held up and couldn't get in. Here's a picture of the Trade Center. So you can see here's the antenna. And the interesting thing is this antenna is on the North Tower, and this is Bankers Trust right here. So that antenna somehow managed to hit over here.
Wow.
I guess it would.
Well, the South Tower had gone down by then, hadn't it?
Right. So the South Tower wasn't in the way. John, I forgot this story talking about flooding. At Bankers Trust, the data centers were 37, 38, and 39. The money transfer systems, which at the time were PDP 1170s, were on the 38th floor. And they processed a huge dollar volume per day. I don't remember the numbers, but it was a significant number. We were installing a new air conditioner on the 39th floor data center. And if you're familiar with these big Liebert units, they have huge cooling towers on the roof. And they were installing this new one. So they had run the piping, and now they were going to check whether there were any leaks. Well, get in and out of the data center, you had double doors. You would have to double security doors. You would go through the first door, and then security would check your ID, make sure there's no one in with you, and then they would let you through the second door. So only one person at a time could get it through the into the data center, and it was controlled. You couldn't do it quickly. So they were installing this unit, and the plumber who was doing it said, I guess he was working alone at the time. So he goes to test it. He goes up on the roof and opens the valve to check whether there's any leak. But he hadn't finished connecting the pipe under the floor of the 39th floor data center. So basically, when he opened the valve on the roof, he drained the whole cooling tower under the floor. And like you're saying, you have these big power connectors. You're carrying mostly 220 power, and now you see water is rising on those. So first of all, you're worried, can I even be standing on this floor with its metal grid, which is definitely conductive. And the floor wasn't designed to be a swimming pool, so it's leaking through, and it's like a thunderstorm on the 38th floor, right above all the systems on there. So everyone's running around getting whatever objects they can get, holding them up above the computer systems, hoping that they could keep the water out. And these units, and you couldn't put them on top, but you also couldn't put them over the computer because the air intake was the top of these. They blew down. So if you put tarps over them, you'd overheat the computers. So you had to hold them above there. Oh my God, was it something? We managed to keep everything running. I guess when you're in the business long enough, you run into everything happening once. Here's another stupid thing, since not involving us, but involving the city of New York. So here's that, let's see, can I make that bigger? Well, just so you see this picture. Okay, can you see that?
Yeah.
This number 7 World Trade Center, that's the emergency command center for the city of New York. That's where it was. It was on the 6th floor of this building. and I believe it's what got to it, what really took it down is it's diesel storage was on the top floor of the building. So this is where I guess Giuliani and all those people were planning to be, but of course that didn't work out. So they ended up going somewhere uptown. I think it was the Sheraton Hotel, I heard.
Carl and Stan, thank you very much for an absolutely fascinating set of presentations.